God bless America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where through hard work, dedication, and some good old-fashioned elbow grease, anything is possible. Here, we live by the proverbs of our icon and national treasure who has no controversies or blemishes associated with his name, our hero, Hulk Hogan.
Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, be true to yourself, true to your country, be a real American. Whew.
This, everything that he just said, is the embodiment of what every citizen should aspire to be like. See, attaining success within our exemplary society, fulfilling the proverbial American dream, requires little more than these aforementioned variables. Obviously, if you haven't yet captured that brass ring dangling in front of you, it's gotta be a result of your lack of effort and determination. Hulk Hogan didn't win his collection of world title belts and main event victories through backstage politicking and string pulling after all. He achieved everything he earned through his unadulterated grit. That's why the guy next to you took it. That's why it seems so easy. Now, everything that I just said, the whole sentiment of it, though supposedly embedded within the groundwork of our society, is little more than fabrication, a calculated lie made privy to United States schoolchildren from the first time they hear the name Christopher Columbus uttered in the classroom. The often unspoken truth of the matter actually bears a far more bleak outlook, because sometimes you do grab that brass ring. Sometimes, through tooth and nail, you fight, scratch, and claw your way toward it, eating your vitamins, saying your prayers, drinking eggs, eating a 12-ounce steak for every meal and all that, until finally you secure it within your grasp. It's then that the true nature of this, quote, American dream, this alleged meritocracy, comes to fruition, inciting a guttural awakening of animosity, hopelessness, and rebellion. It's then that you realize that sometimes the brass ring just doesn't fit. And not only does it not fit, it was never meant to. To say that there is racial inequality within the United States would be the definition of both an understatement and a citation from Captain Obvious. Our country was kind of basically founded off of racism after all, and although we often don't like to admit it, it's still incredibly prevalent within today's society. From discrepancies between educational institutions to the neighborhoods that we live in, most of the establishments within the United States are fundamentally woven through inequality. I mean, you ever wonder why suburban schools tend to be predominantly occupied by white students, and why, quote, inner city schools have become synonymous with minority schools, which in turn become synonymous with underprivileged or underfunded schools? It's not a coincidence. In fact, it's a deliberate expectation, produced through redlining and overall institutional racism. The reason why I mention this, and the reason why it relates to the idea of meritocracy, is that it's a perfect example of why meritocracy is a myth within our country. For those of you who don't know, a meritocracy is defined as, quote, a political system in which economic goods and/or political power are vested in individual people on the basis of talent, effort, and achievement, rather than wealth or social class, which, at first glance, appears to be an ideal method of governing. In a perfect world, those who work the hardest and have the most skills should rise to the top, but this is nowhere close to a perfect world, and one of the major imperfections that affects this political ideology from being effective are these aforementioned establishments that in effect start everyone on an uneven playing field. If the ladder to success is a straight upward motion built upon talent, effort, and achievement, then the rung one starts their ascent on shouldn't be dictated by something as uncontrollable and predetermined as race, when in reality that is absolutely the case. The average white kid starts their journey to success a couple steps ahead of their darker-skinned peers from birth due to the unfair, prejudiced mindsets and foundations within our country. That doesn't mean that the average white kid is racist, or that he's prejudiced himself, or that he doesn't or won't have to work hard for his accomplishments, and it certainly doesn't undermine anything that he achieves. But it does mean that he does have a predetermined advantage from a corrupt system. Hell, I'm an upper middle class white kid who went to a damn near all-white high school, which coincidentally was pretty high ranked in my state. Needless to say, I've benefited from this system that I'm criticizing. That doesn't mean that I didn't work hard, and it doesn't mean that I haven't earned the things that I have, just that I was in a better position, just based on these foundations, and it was easier for me to get in the position that I currently am in than it would have been for a member of a marginalized group. For those benefiting from these systems, success isn't necessarily guaranteed, and it isn't even easy to come by. The road to it is just impacted by a variety of advantages that marginalized groups don't really even get the opportunity to receive. It goes without saying that when you have a supposed system that grants success to those with the most talent, effort, and achievement, that you can't have a society that's constructed in such a way that certain people's talent is made harder to discover, their efforts lead to less rewards because of the lack of resources surrounding them, and their achievements are more arduously obtained because they have a multitude of factors holding them back. Ergo, we've assessed that the United States cannot have a meritocratic society. It just can't, at least at this point in time. So why is it that the idea of the American dream is so pervasive within American culture? Seriously, for as long as I can remember, I've been told that I can do anything I want to do and achieve anything I want to achieve if I just work hard enough. I can bring myself up from the bottom, even though I've never actually been there. Unfortunately, while there is definitely value in instilling within children the idea that hard work is essential for success, the reason why it remains so vital to the American identity still isn't all that benevolent. For starters, the lack of meritocracy we have has definite benefactors and winners, so to speak, because, after all, when you rig the game, you decide who wins. The obvious winners here are rich white people. With enough influence, aka capital, you can kinda do whatever you want. I mean, it's full scope. We can talk about the law, for instance, the infamous case of Ethan Couch, a 16-year-old rich kid who murdered 4 people while driving under the influence and ended up only getting 10 years probation along with some therapy. The reason why? Because the judge ruled that apparently his wealth meant that he never learned boundaries, and through some stretch of the imagination, he didn't know that what he was doing was wrong. Man, I wonder how that case would have turned out if even a middle-class black kid was the killer. It also extends into education, of course, with the college acceptance scandal recently that saw a multitude of unqualified students gaining acceptance into top colleges, all just because their parents were able to pay some hefty bribes, thus keeping the chain going into the next generation. And then, of course, socially, those on top just garner respect. They gain social clout that most people don't, and thus get certain perks that most people don't get. All in all, it's just good to be on top. Keeping the idea of meritocracy alive, however, ensures that the unaware stay unaware. They keep getting fed this pipe dream of self-improvement and work ethic that maybe they can one day reach that on-top pedestal, and they assume that the people who are already there reach those places through these American values. In short, the lack of meritocracy we have gets wealthy white people to the top, while the masquerade ensures that they'll stay there. Not all people are blind to these facts, actually, and we see them illustrated in songs like Working Class Hero and movies like School Ties.
You know something? I'm still gonna get into Harvard. And in 10 years, nobody's gonna remember any of this. But you'll still be a goddamn Jew.
You'll still be a prick.
Well, we now know who's helped, but as for who's harmed by the myth of meritocracy, well, it's a long list, but it can most concisely be penned as minorities, though I'll specifically be focusing on black people. For starters, the common-held belief that we do in fact have a meritocracy shifts blame from those who created these unjust institutions and places it on the individual. When someone doesn't succeed in their goals or is forced into a life of crime or basically doesn't fulfill the idea of the American dream, the majority of the time the blame is placed solely on them, when a lot of the time these, quote, troubled black kids just aren't getting the opportunities that other kids are afforded. When you see the people around you being held back by the corrupt nature of society, yet they're constantly told that it's their fault and that they should have worked harder, and then you start being affected by these statements as well, eventually you just start to believe it. You start to think that maybe it really is you. That you aren't reading from new books because you didn't work hard enough to get into a scholarship for a fancy private school, or that you're stuck in the community you're in, even as a small child, because you deserve it. Over the years, that constant droning voice can batter one's confidence and eventually crush them, when no matter what you do, your absolute best just doesn't cut it. So what happens? Well, naturally, you stop trying. You stop putting in that level of work because, screw it, your best isn't good enough anyways. Beyond countless brilliant minds have been faltered by these ideas, by the myth of meritocracy. Aside from the obvious, a massive issue with marginalized groups being hurt by the ingrained idea of a meritocracy, even beyond the fact that it's just unjust and wrong, is that it's stifling some of potentially the greatest minds our world could ever see. Within every race, ethnicity, background, whatever, there are always special people. There are already so many famous, impactful, world-changing people we all know of who had to endure being slept on while everyone else chased their American dream. Just imagine how many more we would have if so many didn't succumb to the vice grip of prejudice. Through the myth of meritocracy, we've been robbed of innovation, robbed of medical advancement, robbed of rocket scientists, of actors, of musicians, business owners, doctors, chemists, authors, you name it. Millions of individuals who never received the proper guidance or resources to take advantage of the gifts they were given or that they earned. If one thing is for certain, it's that the American dream is restrictive, and that for everyone who has ever or will ever be held back by it, it's crucial that amendments get made.